This is group 2. We have Jill, Jade, Megan, Angela, and myself. I'm Amris. We did our behavior replication project on increasing steps per day and decreasing media usage. I'm going to start out with a little bit of the literature review. And the literature that we used in the development of this behavior change project was based on increasing positive behavior and decreasing negative behavior, and the use of single subject design in the field of ABA in order to improve healthy behaviors. One of the studies that we looked at was a token economy for exercise adherence in pediatric cystic fibrosis patients. The researchers aim to increase physical activity in young patients with CF. They employed an ABA bead single subject design using a token economy for 3 children with cystic fibrosis to increase their physical exercise. The goal was to increase their exercise to at least 20 minutes 4 times a week. They used a token economy for meeting certain goals, and the rewards varied based on the client and what they chose. The results of this study were very positive. All 3 of the patients increased their level of activity dramatically, and even during a 3-month follow-up, all 3 of the patients' levels of exercise was still increased, and 2 of them remained a dramatic increase. Another research that we looked at was strategies to increase lifestyle physical activity in a pedometer-based intervention. And in this research design, the researcher wanted to see if self-selecting strategies to increase physical activity would help better the results. So this consisted of counseling sessions for goal setting and strategy selection for the intervention. Each participant was given a pedometer and tracked their own daily steps and had created their own goals and their own rewards with their counselor. And again, the results of this were overwhelmingly positive, with a large improvement with 95% of the participants, which is a lot. The last article that we looked at was the one that we actually did our replication of, which was decreasing excessive media usage while increasing physical activity. This addressed the lack of physical activity and the most common leading cause, which is media usage, especially in today's society. And childhood obesity in our culture has tripled since the 1980s, partially due to media usage. In this study, a young girl was given a Bowflex tread climber to perform her exercise on, and she tracked it every day in miles. She was rewarded with TV and internet time for meeting her physical activity goals for each day. And the outcome of this treatment, again, was positive in regards to the adolescent increasing her physical activity in both phases. In her body mass composition and media usage also decreased throughout the entire intervention, which is great. All of these treatments were pretty similar in the sense of trying to increase physical health and decrease negative habits. One major downfall with these, not downfall, but a setback potentially, is that they all relied on data reported solely by the clients, which can be a little bit subjective, which is a big problem with single subject design. And then, so we chose to make our study a replication of this study to increase physical activity and simultaneously decrease media usage, making the amount of media usage contingent upon performing physical exercise was how we decided to do this. And ultimately, the main goal of the study was to encourage lifestyle changes that involves more physical activity and less use of media. And so we started with a baseline and decided to increase our physical activity daily and reduce the time that each of us spent on various media. And now I'll go to Jade for some methods.
Hi, so the methods section consists of the participants, which were the 5 graduate students that are speaking now today. There are 4 female participants and 1 male participant, and the participants were assigned to the group project since they were all within the same time zone of the Pacific Standard Time. In this project, we utilized the CSX Small Walking 3D Fitness Activity Tracker, which was chosen to monitor that activity in the study. And it was chosen because it was easily accessible and all participants could utilize consistently to track their daily steps. The pedometer was used to monitor various aspects of daily activity, such as total steps per day, distance traveled, calories burned, and total minutes that a person is active. Data for these components could be stored up to 1 week, but it's very important to note that this activity tracker would only track any movements that were over 10 steps or they wouldn't be recorded. For the purpose of this study, the pedometer is used to just track total steps per day for each participant. The participants were instructed to wear the activity tracker at all times of the day throughout each phase of the current study. Participants were directed to record their individual body mass composition every 2 days. The BMC measurements consisted of body weight, body mass index, and body fat percentage measurement. Online tools for calculating BMI and body fat percentage were chosen to ensure the apparatus used to track these figures were also consistent across these participants. The body mass index calculator was used by all participants, and it was accessed through the National Heart, Lung, and Heart Institute website. This figure was calculated with each individual's participant's height and weight. The body fat calculator was used by participants was accessed through active.com. Each participant entered their gender, weight, and circumference of their waist, wrist, forearm, and hips to calculate their body fat percentage. Now we're going to move on to the procedure, and I'm going to pass it over to Jill.
Okay, so we used a changing criterion design similar to the original study, and the 2 target behaviors that we identified for our part of the study were, the 2 target behaviors we identified for change were physical activity and media usage, similar to the study. And for the purposes of our study, physical activity was defined as any walking, jogging, or running movement in which a person placed 1 foot in front of the other while they were standing in an upright position, regardless of their speed. And the 2 media usage behaviors that we tracked in this study were internet usage and watching television. And internet usage was defined as any internet browsing or social media usage, such as Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, that did not include sending texts or exchanging emails related to work activities or academic activities for school. And watching TV was defined as any instance of an individual directing their eyes to view a television for leisure, whether it be watching TV shows, movies, or news through cable or streaming services such as Hulu and Netflix. And as was already explained, physical activity was targeted for increase, while media usage was targeted for decrease in this study. And due to time constraints, the total duration of the study was only 17 days. And a minimum of 3 data points were required during baseline, and 5 data points were required for each treatment phase. So for the data collection procedures, we used a data collection form that was provided to each participant. And they were instructed to collect their own data for total step count, weight, body mass index, body fat percentage, internet usage, and their time spent watching TV on a spreadsheet daily, with the exception of the body mass composition measures, BMI and body fat and weight, as these were only to be recorded every 2 days. Data points consisted of 1 24-hour period, which began at 10 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time and ended at 9:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time the following day. And in addition to each participant collecting data, 5 other individuals were involved in conducting the present study, because each participant selected a coach, which could have been a parent, friend, or significant other that was there to monitor and record data for their daily step count, internet usage, TV time, weight, body mass index, and body fat percentage. And coaches were chosen for each participant in order to provide an element of accountability and ensuring that each participant was following procedures as outlined and collecting accurate data throughout the study. So next I'll discuss each phase of our study. First was the baseline phase, and during this phase, participants were able to access media as they wanted to without any kind of restriction. Their daily step count activities were monitored and recorded on the data collection for a minimum of 3 data points, and each participant was instructed to wear their pedometer for 24 hours a day beginning at 10 p.m. on the first day, and to monitor their activity for 24 hours thereafter. And at the end of each day during the baseline phase, participants were instructed to record their total number of steps, their total internet usage time, and their total TV time on the data collection form that was provided. Once this information was collected and the step count was to be reset, and the next 24-hour period and next data point began. This process was repeated until a minimum of 3 data points had been collected for each participant. The designated coach for each participant participated in this phase of the study by verifying the daily step count on a participant's activity tracker, among other variables, at the end of each night when this recorder was dated, when this data was recorded at 10 p.m. And this occurred throughout the phase. Coaches were asked to record their data on a separate data collection form for use with IOA measurement. And body mass composition measures, body weight, body mass index, and body fat percentage were again recorded during this phase by each participant every 2 days, beginning on the first day of the baseline phase and the first day of the study. And during the next phase of the study, which was phase 1, treatment participants were asked to perform any physical activity for a minimum of 5 days out of 7 days of a week-long period in exchange for additional time browsing the internet for non-school and non-work related activities. Similar to the baseline phase, they were asked to wear their pedometer at all times during each 24-hour period and collect data at the end of each day at 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Participants were, at this time, similar to the baseline phase, asked to record data for their total step count, as well as their internet usage, TV usage, and body mass composition measures when appropriate. For every 1,000 steps an individual participant completed over their individual baseline average number of steps, they earned 1 hour of time for non-school and non-work related internet time for that day. If for any reason a participant chose during this phase not to engage in physical activity during a day they had designated for, or as one of their 5 days, they were not allowed any internet time for that particular day. If a participant was unable to reach their goal for any reason of increasing their step count by 1,000 steps over their average baseline for 2 consecutive days, their goal was then decreased to 750 steps over their average baseline count for the remainder of treatment phase 1. Following this change, they were able to access reinforcement for 1 additional hour of internet time if they achieved this 750 step goal. During phase 2 of treatment, participants were again asked to track their activity for 24 hours. Their goal at this time was working towards additional TV time, as well as the possibility of additional internet usage time. They were asked to wear their pedometer 24 hours a day, and at the end of each day, similar to treatment phase 1 and the baseline phase, they were asked to record their total step count, the amount of time they'd spent on the internet and watching TV in that 24-hour period, and when appropriate, their body mass composition measures. For every 1,500 steps an individual participant completed over their individual baseline average number of steps, that participant earned 1.5 hours of TV time for that day. For every additional 500 steps that followed, so once a participant had reached 2,000 steps over their baseline average, the participant would then earn an additional 30 minutes of time available on the internet in which they could engage in non-work and non-school related activities. Similar to treatment phase 1, it was put into place that if a participant chose not to engage in any physical activity on one of the 5 days of a week that they had designated to be participating in the study, they were not allowed to access any TV time for those days. If a participant was unable to reach their goal of increasing their step count by 1,500 steps over their average baseline for 2 consecutive days, similar to treatment phase 1, their goal was decreased. At this time, their goal for the remainder of the phase was to increase their step count by 1,000 steps. And following this change in their goal, if they were able to reach this 1,000 step goal, they were able to access the hour-and-a-half of TV as was outlined in the remainder of the study. And next, we are going to send it to Megan to discuss our results section.
Okay, so to display the effectiveness of this behavior modification plan, data is displayed by daily number of steps, daily hours of internet and media usage, BMI, body fat percentage during baseline treatment phase 1 and treatment phase 2 periods. Table 1 displays the baseline data where Angela averaged 9,770 steps, Amherst averaged 6,772 steps, while Jill averaged 10,966 steps. Jade also averaged 7,861 steps. Megan averaged 10,000 steps during baseline phase. Figures 1 through 5 display all the step counts through baseline and treatment phase 1 and 2 for each participant. So our figures display that each of the participants' step counts increased during treatment phase 1. The present study involved making media usage contingent upon performing physical exercise. That is, for each day in treatment phase 1, when the step count amounted to 1,000 steps above the participant's average baseline step count, the participant received an extra 1 hour of non-school, non-work-related internet time. Looking at the tables and graphs representing daily step count, each participant's step count increased during treatment phase 1. Angela's average for treatment phase 1 increased 1,054 steps from her baseline, while Amherst's average increased 2,738 steps. Jill was also able to increase her average by 1,416 steps, while Megan increased her average by 587 steps. Jade also increased his step count by 1,503 steps over his baseline step count in treatment phase 1. For example, our figures show that Amherst's average decreased from 1.75 hours to 0.95 hours of internet usage between baseline and phase 1, while Jade's average internet usage decreased from 1.58 hours to 1.2 hours. Therefore, the implementation of this contingency procedure led to an increase in physical activity and a decrease in media usage during treatment phase 1. Moving on to treatment phase 2, the figures show that each participant's step count also increased. Using the contingency described above for each treatment phase 2, where the step count amounted to 1,500 steps above the participant's average baseline step count, the participant received an extra 1.5 hours of non-school, non-work related TV time. For every additional 500 steps walked, each participant earned an additional 30 minutes of internet time. So when looking at these tables, Angela increased her average step count by 2,660 steps compared to her average baseline step count. Amherst was able to increase her step count by 6,574 steps. Jill increased by 831 steps. And Megan was able to increase her step count by 1,543 steps. And Jade increased his step count by 2,060 steps. Also, the figures show that TV usage decreased. For example, Angela's average TV usage decreased from 2.76 hours to 1.5 hours between baseline and phase 2, while Amherst's averages decreased from 3 hours to 1.4 hours between baseline and phase 2. This shows that the implementation of this contingency procedure led to an increase in physical activity and a decrease in media usage during treatment phase 2. The more time that was spent engaged in physical activity produced less time spent on the internet and watching TV. Finally, we look at body mass index and body fat percentage, and basically each of these stayed stable for most of the participants. The body fat calculator that was used was accessed through active.com's website and used gender, weight, circumference of waist, wrist, forearm, and hips to calculate the body fat, while BMI was accessed through National Heart, Lung, and Heart Institute website, utilizing the participants' height and weight. Although step count for each of the participants increased, BMI and body fat percentage remained stable and changed little from baseline to treatment phases. For example, Megan's BMI stayed at consistent 20.5 and her body fat percentage also stayed consistent at 25% throughout the entire intervention. These results indicate that while media usage decreased and daily step count increased, physical activity did not increase to such a level that it reduced BMI and body fat percentage. Due to time constraints, baseline was only 3 days, while each treatment day was 5 days. It may be plausible that although treatment was making positive changes in behavior, the implementation of the treatment may not have been carried out long enough to make great changes in BMI and body fat percentage measurements. Utilizing this contingency in treatment over a longer period of time, greater increases in step count and greater decreases in media usage, as well as decreases in BMI and body fat percentage. So now Amaris will show you her graph for step counts.
Alrighty. So as you can see here for my steps per day, both treatment phases increased from my baseline, and phase 2's increase was even more significant than phase 1.
And so I'm going to present my graph, and I have a similar trend as well. It is lower in baseline and then slowly increasing with each group on phase 1 and phase 2. And a disclaimer is that all of our step counts on our graphs are standardized, so everyone has the same step count. So it may appear that some people had less of an increase, but everyone did have an increase to some extent.
Okay, so next I will show my graph, if it'll come through. So there was a lot more variability in my baseline, and that's one of the limitations that will be discussed shortly. If we would have had a more extended baseline phase, that may have benefited us in the study. But there was also more variability for me across phases, and there was a slight decrease that can be observed definitely in phase 2.
Okay, sorry guys. Okay, so baseline wasn't exactly stable as with the other participants in this group, but as you can see, there was an upward trend in step count as the treatment phases progressed. And now Angela will show you her step count graph.
Okay, so here is mine, and similar to everyone else's in the group that we were just talking about, there is like an outlier in my baseline phase for my step count. We weren't able to get a stable baseline with the short amount of time that we had, but there is an average increase in my intervention phase 1, and then more of an increase average in the intervention phase 2.
All right, and here is my internet usage graph for the project. And it's a similar trend, however, it's decreasing. As you can see in both phase 1 and phase 2, my internet usage decreased slightly from the baseline, with phase 2 being a little more dramatic of a decrease.
And I'm going to present the my TV usage graph. As you can see, there's a bit of an increase here in baseline, while in phase 1 and phase 2, they are significantly lower than they were in baseline phase. As you can see here, there was no TV usage in phase 1 in this day, which can be one of the limitations that we have found within our project that may be discussed later, how some days we may not be able to utilize a TV, and we might have other plans that may affect that. And I'm going to pass it off to Angela for the discussion section.
Okay, so in our study, each participant performed a certain amount of physical activity measured by the total amount of steps per day in order to receive internet time not related to school in phase 1 and then TV time for phase 2. While the current experiment was well structured and organized, there were several limitations to the study. One main limitation was the amount of time the participants had to conduct the baseline phase. There was limited time to complete this study, so the individuals were not able to wait for baseline data to become stable. Instead, we had to average the first 3 days the data was collected. If there was more time to take the baseline, it would have provided a more accurate average step count to go off of for the rest of the intervention. Another major limitation was that the reinforcers selected for the study may not have actually been reinforcing to the participants in this group. In the 2 phases, the reinforcers used were internet usage and television time. The ultimate goal of the study was to increase physical activity by making TV and internet usage contingent upon the increased steps, therefore also decreasing the TV and internet usage. Unfortunately, if internet and TV are not reinforcing enough to the participants in the study, then they would not have been motivated to increase their daily steps. Along with this, it also means another limitation to the study was that the consequences also had no real impact on the participants. If the TV and internet time was not motivating enough to encourage the individual to increase their daily steps, then the consequences of losing that media time would not have been an issue. Another limitation to the study was that for this study, physical activity was measured strictly by daily steps and not by other forms of exercise. For instance, if a participant lifted weights for an hour as their form of exercise, then it would not have been taken into account for this study since it did not contribute to the number of steps that they had. Aside from the primary goals of the experiment, a secondary component was to measure body weight every other day to see if the increase in daily exercise had any impact on average body weight. A limitation to this part of the study was that other contributors that affect body weight were not considered, such as daily food intake. Without knowing the calories the participant is consuming each day, you cannot draw the conclusion that an increased exercise alone decreases the individual's body weight. Overall, the results did show that each participant increased average daily step count throughout each phase. Along with this, TV usage and internet usage decreased for most of the participants. For some participants, for example, for myself, internet usage did not decrease, but step count throughout the phases did increase. Ideally, we would have seen the increased step count and the decrease in the internet, but this was because baseline data for internet usage was very low for myself during the baseline phase. And this shows what we were referring to before, that the reinforcers used for the study may not have been preferred. But since there was still an increase in step count for these phases, there are other factors to consider that may have reinforced the increase of physical activity, such as self-motivation. Also, while the average for participants did show an increase in steps throughout phases, some data shows little increase between the 2 phases, and then some of the participants show a significant increase between the 2 phases. As seen in Amaris's daily step count, there was a large increase from phase 1 to phase 2, compared to Jade, which shows little increase between those 2 phases. This may be due to the change in reinforcers throughout those 2 phases. The reinforcer used in phase 2, which was the TV time, may have been a more powerful motivator for Amaris than it was for Jade, which would have explained why hers increased more than Jade's did throughout the 2 phases. For all participants, there was no significant impact on average body weight, BMI, and body fat percentage throughout baseline and the 2 intervention phases. This may have been due to the limited time the individuals had to complete the study. And if the study could have been conducted over a span of months instead of weeks, then there may have been more substantial results for this target. Research suggests that a contributing factor to the obesity epidemic is an increased use of TV and internet, making people more sedentary. The goal of the present study was to increase daily physical activity by making it contingent upon media usage, therefore also decreasing media usage throughout the day. Each of the participants in the study did show an increase in daily steps and an overall decrease in TV and internet use. Future research should consider longer phase periods to see if an increase in daily step count does contribute to a decrease in the body weight. Also, if a preference assessment could have been conducted for the participants to choose their most used form of media before the intervention started, then it may help show a greater increase in daily steps throughout phases. The results of the present study did provide hope that by making media usage contingent upon physical activity, individuals will increase their daily exercise. So that's all that we have to share with you this evening. So thank you for watching.